So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So we have Ramesh Raskar, who's a colleague of mine here in the Media Lab. He's the winner of the Lemelson Prize, the SIGGRAPH Prize. You have, 100 patents now?
Something like that.
Oh, crazy. And he just started C10 AI Ventures, which is a venture studio where you're the chief scientist. So we hope to hear lots about that. And Hari Balakrishnan, who's over in computer science and AI and is very famous, but more recently he started something called CMI, which is the world's largest telematic service provider, helps keep you safe on the roads. Fair? Okay, good. So what I thought we would do here is have a conversation about where is AI going, how is the world going to adapt to it from the perspective of the people that you see here, right? So this is like the MIT, these people are the best that we have here, right? So good, okay. So I thought I'd start with something that was the motivation for this panel to begin with back at the beginning, which is, so the robot overlords are coming, right? The robot overlords are going to kill us all or take over, or we're going to work for them, and then they're going to decide that we aren't any good and they're going to get rid of us. That's the sort of thing you hear a lot of people say. And all of this is due to AI somehow. And I wonder if you guys have sort of an idea what the world is going to look like in, say, 20 years because of all this AI stuff. I don't think either of you are in the extinction camp.
I don't think so. I don't think so. Two of my both daughters are here sitting in the audience. They're under 15, both of them. And when I think about, first of all, what should they learn in school, to all the way to what will our role be, all three of us are professors, but also entrepreneurs, what it would be, and also what's the role for society. I think it's a very interesting time to think about that. I think nobody knows what's going to happen, but if you think about the previous revolutions that have projected massive changes, whether it's internet, whether it's CRISPR, whether it's nuclear energy, nuclear power, there have been a lot of discussions about these risks and their governance. And eventually we have figured out a reasonable equilibrium where the benefits will definitely outweigh the risks, and the risks can be managed. I think what we can learn in AI is going to be very interesting. Unfortunately, it's moving much faster than the previous two technologies. I mean, CRISPR, only now we have an FDA approved treatment. So it took years after CRISPR came on the scene. With AI, that's not the case. So can we learn from previous risky but exciting innovations or not is an open question.
Oh, hi.
Yeah, so I'm a techno-optimist about these things. And I think that there's a few things that will work in the next 20 years and a few things that I think we are crazy to imagine that will work. So I think on the crazy side, I don't think this is going to lead to extinction or any of those types of possibilities. I think that on the positive side, I'm looking forward to a time when AI can help improve our health. With implants, with not only for physical stuff, but also for, to improve our memory and to make that so that it's almost like you have that as an assistant. I think those things are going to become real. I suspect that in 20 years, we will probably see 20 to 25% of the vehicles on the road worldwide have a significant form of autonomy. It's probably not going to be more than that worldwide. And I suspect that the real challenge that we will continue to tackle is operationalizing AI. I think there are going to be some use cases where it completely replaces humans and it's completely automated and everything is actuated and done with AI. But I suspect that in a lot of other cases, figuring out how to operationalize that in the rest of the business workflow would be a significant challenge. And I think just specifically with education, I think we've always wanted technology to improve education, and largely speaking, very few technologies have. I suspect AI will actually make a huge difference, but it's an example where it's not going to replace human teachers. I think that it actually will allow education at scale to become far more personalized. by allowing the human teacher to very quickly get a summary of where that particular learner stands, and you could make this completely remote and have great telepresence, so they could be in a different, completely different part of the world. So I think there's a lot of that will happen, and I think 20 years is a good time frame for that. I think on the negative side, we will see people die due to AI, and I think there will be a reaction to that, but we'll eventually cope with it, because I think it's a technology that can't be stopped.
I think one of the things that I had my attention drawn to recently is the first wave of AI, which was in the 50s. One part of it was about logic, but the other thing was optimal resource allocation, which is essentially linear solving under constraints. And this was the thing that was going to save the Soviet economy. Yeah. It was the planned economy. And it didn't work out real well. But on the other hand, every spreadsheet on the planet has this sort of thing built into it. It's the most common computation out there. So it may be that all the things about robot overlords or infinite advanced intelligence and stuff isn't going to happen any better than the Soviet Union planned economy, but we're going to see it everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think sort of pick up on the thing that you just said, which is that, so what happens to the people? So one of the sets of visions people have about this is that all the people will be out of work. What are we going to do? We've got to have universal basic income, things like that. The other thing that is the more historical thing is we find new things to do, and that new sort of productivity helps. I'll go the other direction, since you brought it up.
So, I mean, the short answer is we are all guessing as to what's going to happen to the employment or to the occupation or hobbies of people. I mean, it's clear that some jobs will vanish, but that's always been true with any technological change that's happened. Things just kind of vanish. I think that if we're sort of addressing people who are probably younger than 25 or 30, I think that no longer, already it's not the case that what you learn before the age of 20 or 25 gives you the ability to have a 40 to 45 year career. That's just gone. Actually, it's tough for us. We're learning new things from our students every day, more so than they're learning from us. And it's a struggle.
You're not supposed to tell people that.
Yeah, I know. But I think AI will help us learn better. It'll help us learn how to learn new things. It'll help us improve it. And I do believe this idea of us becoming a lot smarter, if we choose to become smarter, would be a positive. As for what people will do, the story was, the AI will do all of the hard stuff, the drudge work, and we can write poetry. It looks like the opposite is happening. So I feel that at the end of the day, there are three classes of AI, very, very broad generalization. I'm going to miss a lot of stuff. There's AI that works really well in simulation. It'll beat everybody playing any game, like chess or Go or whatever. But actually, the advent of AI and algorithms in chess has made people much more excited about human chess, because humans are becoming better at chess due to those machines. And I think that we will see a lot of that happen in other walks of life. We'll start to see how humans can become better painters or better songwriters or what have you using those tools. So I feel like that will happen, and AI will absolutely change those fields. The second is in things like resource management, like in big data centers or allocating large-scale distributed decentralized resources. And I think there AI research has already shown that it's going to work. I think we'll just see more and more of that happening. The biggest challenge for AI, and I think where humans will continue to be in the loop, is AI in the real world, whether it be robotics, whether it be medicine, whether it be in factory floors and so on. And I think that this is going to be a new form of machine-human symbiosis, where one possibility is that humans act in a more supervisory role. The other possibility is the AI acts in a more supervisory role, and we're interested to see how it turns out.
Ramesh, what do you think?
I'm really glad you brought this point of does optimization take us into new regimes? Because if you think about UN's Sustainable Development Goals, which are about water and health and poverty and agriculture and so on, the challenge has been that many of those fields just don't have the unit economics to become multi-trillion-dollar businesses. So there's no trillion-dollar company in the sectors I just mentioned. And the reason for that is the margins are so low that doesn't attract the top talent. But what could happen over time, just the way it took a long time for solar to become comparable to fossil fuels, and only now the unit economics works, I think the productivity gains because of AI will similarly bring unit economics. So it'll be exciting to work in water and agriculture because the productivity is so high that right now your margins may be 10% or minus 10%, but very soon the margins might be 100% to 200%. So I think that's an exciting time that as AI starts coming into the real world, you'll start seeing these exciting opportunities. And even for C10 Labs, which is a venture studio we launched here, that's the single hypothesis, which is productivity gains in areas that are unexplored will give you unreal, tremendous gains. They'll become very, very lucrative. The question is, the world GDP is $100 trillion. How can we figure out what are the sectors that will impact it in the next 2 years versus will be impacted in the next 10 years? And if you can do the right matchmaking between opportunities in AI and opportunities in the real world sectors, I think we can go very far. And then one quick point to add to your question about the Soviet model is, unfortunately, that's how it's working right now. Actually, Shantanu Bhattacharya, who's a scientist in our group, gave me the same analogy for Soviet. He said, when we're thinking about Cray supercomputers or IBM mainframes in the 80s, we thought that's the way computing is going to play out, right here on Route 128. But very quickly, we had the PC and the mobile and the IoT, and things became highly decentralized. So very kind of a Soviet mindset of centralize everything the way we are doing it with big companies right now. Centralized data, centralized compute, centralized governance. And we just use their APIs, GPT-4 and cloud and so on. I think that model is going to shatter very soon. And we'll see this decentralization of AI come in. So I think the intersection of productivity gains in the real world and ability to do this in a very decentralized way are two major trends that are going to intersect very soon.
Can I push back on something?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I sort of agree with the decentralization, but I think that's because of the highly data-centric nature of it, and maybe we'll cover that later with the fact that more and more organizations and entities don't want all of the data to be shipped to some centralized place. I totally agree with you. But I think with AI, it's not clear to me that this long tail of businesses or opportunities for society where there's not enough of a market to justify big investment, AI is really well suited. Because in the short term, I actually feel from some experience we've had at my company and other startups I talk to, that the short-term costs of everything from large-scale data acquisition to training to everything else, actually you're far better off hiring a bunch of very smart human beings.
Yeah.
More economical to get going like that. So I wonder about whether this hypothesis that AI is going to help us scale the heavy tail, which will never get that big, is really true.
I mean, if you look at all the big companies right now, forget the oil era, Exxon and ExxonMobil and so on, but nearly all top 10 Fortune 500 companies have all made their revenue on the long tail. Facebook, Meta, Facebook.
That's not long tail. There's 3 billion, 4 billion people using it.
I mean, all of us are buying $500, $1,000 mobile phones as opposed to companies that are selling large servers. Same thing with...
If you look at the catalog of Amazon, there's a huge number of long
Exactly.
tail
Yeah, I know.
things.
So the long
And
tail is
being
where
able
the money
to
is
treat
made.
those uniformly is what makes it profitable. Yep.
Yeah, I think that your question is also about centralization of talent, because I was talking about centralization of compute data and governance. Centralization of talent is a very important thing, but like you said, AI is going to change education. So the smart kids in Tanzania will be 80-90% of the talent level as the best people out there. So I think we're going to see a lot of decentralization of those opportunities as well. And it remains to be seen whether there's always going to be a delta between a talent available in Tanzania versus talent available somewhere else. So, and decentralization on the other hand, because of regulation, because of trade secrets, if I think about the health system in Tanzania, just to pick an example, the insurance players there, the hospitals there, the government systems are not going to wake up one day and say like, let me send all my data to Sam, and Sam is going to build this really nice model for us, and we'll just use Sam's APIs and run the healthcare system
What
in
I
Tanzania.
see in all the companies that I work with is they're all building little AI models on their data. They use something like Llama to begin with, but then they specialize it with their process data.
Right.
And that what they hope to do is get something that's better than just a linear constraint solver or an expert system.
Yeah.
And they do, it's not that hard.
And because a graph is going to be a graph network is going to be much more stable. We're talking about risks and opportunities in this panel. a graph is much more stable than a hierarchical tree. So, I mean, you mentioned the different ways of AI. Marvin Minsky called it the society of the mind. He didn't call it the mind, like one mega AI. He said a society of multiple small AIs. And we are all, by the way, are multiple small AIs. Like even a large organization has an HR department and a sales department and a marketing department and tech department, which are all small AIs, human AIs. A CEO doesn't run all those departments. And I think the same thing is true for future.
So one of the more hopeful things is that most of the experiments people have done on making AI as an advisor helps middle skill people or lower skill people more than high skill people. And that's actually really interesting because that allows you to onboard people. It allows you to make up some of the skills gap. There was an interesting illustration I ran into yesterday, which is someone was talking about AI for law. So AI is very effective in law, but currently law is so expensive that you can't afford to hire a lawyer. You can't get representative. If you could get something that was pretty good, cheaper, that would help lots of people. Right?
Again, the unit economics.
It's changing it's changing the economics of the whole thing.
Yeah, I think it's true in many professions. I just don't know about some of these, like solving the water crisis, for example, whether AI magically tackles those types of problems.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. So, it's not considered a glamorous job to go figure out water. But if AI starts behaving like a scientist, and you have this amazing tools, not AI as an assistant, AI as an engineer, but AI as a scientist, then they can create all the solutions on the fly. The geometric design, the mechanical design, the CFDs and so on. And a lot of these issues can be solved. Same thing on the incentivization of how do you not just invent, but how do you have a diffusion of those inventions in the society? And again, unfortunately, the whole wave of decentralized finance didn't work out as we wanted. But the incentivization mechanisms, if they are done right, and Sandy's going to do it for us, both the invention as well as dissemination of those inventions.
Well, I think one of the worst things that happened is all of the crypto stuff where you don't have identity, you don't have all sort of the normal sort of guardrails on it. And as a consequence, theft and fraud in crypto has ended up just destroying a lot of things. Bad reputation for a lot of this stuff.
Wait, it'll come back.
Funded 50% of the North Korean nuclear missile program. I mean, come on, this is pretty bad. So there are some real downsides to this stuff, right? One of the more interesting things that we've run into is looking at really complicated things like the microbiome. And it turns out that, it's millions of organisms and hundreds of thousands of little RNA fragments in there. But it turns out that if you actually get enough samples of that, you can begin understanding how the thing as a whole functions. And we've been able to do it for, CO2 reduction and are looking at it for human health. So there's a lot of things where the reductionist approach just sort of doesn't work, right? Because it's all connected. And maybe this is some way where we can begin to get a handle on really complex phenomena. You're nodding your head, so I'm going to...
Yeah, I agree, yeah. I mean, we see this in large-scale systems, right, of any kind, where you really have to, they're all decomposed into individual components, but the interactions are so complicated that AI as a tool has been tremendously useful. And I'm not even talking about generative AI, just things like reinforcement learning work really well.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that people don't appreciate is that a lot of the reason the tools we have today don't work is because they're sort of abstractions of the situation, and the real situation is a lot more complicated. And one of the strengths of this sort of thing is that it has lots of dimensions, so you can begin to actually model some of that complexity. Ramesh, what have you seen in this sort of space?
I think I'm a kind of a decentralization maximalist here, and I think the equilibrium is going to come when we have democratization of AI, so that's enough players, and you don't have this big gap between the haves and have-nots, because the moment that happens, when you only have one big chip company, like it's happening with NVIDIA, if you have only one big Copilot company like Microsoft, versus when there are a lot of players in this space, and they're distributed geographically as well, I think we're going to see this interesting back and forth. You do need the leaders to bring the innovation first. NVIDIA has to spend billions of dollars to bring us highly compact chips that have a very small energy footprint and so on. So I just worry about how long does it take to go from the crazy supercomputers to IoT and so on. So that's one of the biggest things that bothers me about how long is it going to take us to go back and forth.
This is one of the things that everybody talks about is it's going to take $1 trillion to scale this stuff. But wait, I don't really want an AI that speaks Romanian. It doesn't do me any good.
Specialize it.
I want narrow things that solve real problems, and those are lots easier. And that's sort of this beginning path to like AI everywhere, as opposed to the Uber things. And then I see a lot of things in hardware too. ASICs being built special for this sort of stuff that are much more efficient than the current GPUs. What do you think is going to happen in this ecology? How are we going to get to sort of AI everywhere, where AI is maybe with small letters rather than big letters?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable. I don't know if it's going to be completely decentralized the way you're talking, but I think there are two big trends. People in many cases, don't want all of their data shipped to some other entity. There are regulations against it. People feel uncomfortable about sharing their own, you take your home audio Alexa type system. But I think that the way this will come about is specialized models and highly federated learning. And the way I like to think about it is there's sort of this big model, but then it's a big distributed system, and you end up being able to partition that amongst different pieces and different entities, which each has some well-defined set of things that it provides into the higher layers. So in some cases, you have completely independent autonomous decision making. In some other cases, they do need to collaborate. And you don't have to do this with just some generative AI. You could use graphical neural networks. There are many, many different techniques that we've developed. Distributed reinforcement learning. And so I think we should be thinking about it very broadly, but it's inevitable. It's going to happen. And there are many cases where there are fundamental resource constraints that prevent you from delivering all of the data all the time to a central entity. If you imagine the 1.4 billion vehicles in the world, all delivering 60 frames a second video all the time from, continuously, there's not really, it's going to kill the networks. And I don't think anyone actually even wants to do that. And you would end up with a high degree of
if you think about how the human society behaves, and I'm sure anthropologists are going to play a big role in how kind of governance of, AIs are going to work. And so, as a human society, we have figured out how each of us have expertise and we help each other out. And, we can't imagine, a super brilliant person governing all of us, at least for most of the time.
I could.
Most of the time. Most of the time. And so I think this challenge of decentralization is key, but that alone is not going to solve the problem, because you also want the economic forces. So you need the incentivization of why should somebody participate in the AI ecosystem? Are they going to get paid in dollars, or these fuzzy tokens from cryptocurrencies, or are they going to get paid in compute, or they get ahead of the queue? So I think there's going to be a lot of incentive mechanisms that you have to design as well. So some of the research we do in our group here in decentralized AI is actually thinking about data markets, model markets, and incentive mechanisms. And it's one of those areas that seems adjacent to progress in AI, but I think they'll converge very soon. Instead of behavior economics, we'll call it AI economics.
Okay, so we're almost out of time here. One last question. Where are we in the hype cycle?
Well, with generative AI, we're near the peak. Or maybe we're about...
So we're going to crash next year?
Well, I think that what people will find is a tremendous amount of misinformation. And I don't know if it'll crash next year, but 18 months.
18 months. Okay, there you are. Get your investments in, get out in 18 months.
Well, it doesn't go back up.
Well, no, it always goes back up, but that could be 10 years, right? Yeah.
I would say there's absolutely a lot of overinvestment in certain areas, but surprisingly underinvestment in many other areas. And if you can, I would say there's underinvestment in most of the areas. So as we said earlier, many real world sectors are just not getting enough attention.
That's right.
And they're going to just bloom. They're just going to boom in the next 3 to 5 years. Not right away, because it takes a long time for new technology to be absorbed, to see the productivity gains, for the rest of the ecosystem to have right protocols, to work with each other, and so on. That'll take some time, but over the next 3 to 5 years, you'll see these highly underinvested areas really take off. And you can use the analogy from the internet era. In the beginning, everybody bought stock in chip companies and OS companies, right? And Cisco and IBM and so on. But very soon, what was built on top of that, which is the applied internet, eBay, Yahoo, Google, Facebook, and so on, they're so much bigger than anybody who's selling, not right now with NVIDIA, but in the internet era, anybody who's selling chips or internet infrastructure.
Okay,
so infrastructure play, which is highly overinvested right now, is 18 months, 2 years.
Okay, and let me just remind people that Western companies are not the only ones on the planet, and that the investment cycle in China is very different, and they have a lot of engineers, and they're 100% on it, and they don't worry too much about who owns the data. And the fastest growing area in the world in terms of data systems is India and the surrounding countries there. They've gone from essentially 0 to a couple billion on some of their systems in the last 2-3 years. Guess what? That's where a lot of it's going to come from, not from the people in this room. So keep your radar out.
Can I just mention, so the decentralized AI team working on that is downstairs, and they're showing demos on how you can use decentralized AI for the Indian stack. So please go check them out. I think they're right on the bottom floor.
Sounds good. That's the backend people?
Yeah, backend people, yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you.
Thank
I
you.
don't know who's supposed to be up next.